Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm glad you're here, but I have to give you a bit of a warning up front. Today, we are opening a file that is, honestly, it's difficult, it's dark.
It really is.
But it is also incredibly important because it reveals so much about how our cities work, how investigations work, and unfortunately, how they fail.
It really does. We are looking at the Toronto Village murders.
Yeah.
The serial homicides committed by Bruce McArthur between 2010 and 2017.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of people, especially if you're not from Toronto, you might know the headline, The Landscaper Killer.
Right, that's the one.
But the layers to this story go so much deeper than just the gruesome headlines.
Absolutely. And just to set the stage here, the contrast of the perpetrator is what always sticks with me. It's the thing I can't quite reconcile.
I know what you mean.
We're talking about Bruce McArthur. At the time of his arrest, he was a 66-year-old grandfather. He was a self-employed landscaper. And, get this, he was an occasional mall Santa Claus.
That image is so jarring. It's almost unbelievable. You have this figure who represents safety, jolliness, literally Santa Claus at the Agincourt Mall.
Right.
Hiding in plain sight.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, he's operating in the Church and Wellesley neighborhood, the gay village, which is supposed to be a sanctuary for the LGBTQ community.
And that's really the mission of this deep dive today. We want to unpack exactly how a serial killer operated undetected for 7 years in a major modern metropolis. We need to look at the systemic failures that allowed him to slip through the cracks, and we need to understand the specific vulnerabilities of the victims that he exploited.
Right. And to do that, we've gone through a comprehensive compilation of facts. We're looking at the investigation timelines, the victims' backgrounds, the legal proceedings, and the very critical community reviews like Project Houston and Project Prism that came later.
So let's start with the man himself. Part 1, the perpetrator. Because when you look at his bio, it doesn't scream monster.
No.
It screams boring.
It does. It's the classic banality of evil that people talk about. Bruce McArthur was born in 1951. He was raised on a farm in Argyll, Ontario.
A small town.
Very small town. Very traditional religious upbringing, Irish Catholic mother, Scottish Presbyterian father. It was a very straight-laced environment.
And he followed the script, right? I mean, for a man of that generation, he did what he was supposed to do.
Exactly. He married a woman named Janice Campbell in his early 20s.
Yeah.
They had 2 kids, a son and a daughter. He worked in the clothing trade for years.
Right.
He was literally a traveling sock salesman for McGregor Socks.
A sock salesman. It's just so mundane, isn't it? But you have to wonder about the psychology there. Being a traveling salesman, I mean, that's a lonely life.
It is.
Lots of time on the road, lots of time in hotels.
It creates an opportunity for a double life, for sure. And we know that underneath this suburban working man exterior, there was a lot of turmoil. He was struggling with his sexuality in a time and place. We're talking rural Ontario in the 50s and 60s, where that wasn't just frowned upon, it was.
Completely hidden.
It was completely hidden. It was dangerous.
So he suppresses it for decades. When does the mask start to slip? When does he change course?
Well, he separated from his wife in 1997 and moved to Toronto. This is a common story for that generation, really.
Right.
Moving to the big city to finally find himself, to live openly. He moves into the gay community, eventually settles in an apartment in Thorncliffe Park, and starts his landscaping business, artistic designs.
And that business is key, isn't it? Because it wasn't just a job. It gave him access.
It gave him everything.
Yeah.
It gave him a vehicle, the van. Yeah. It gave him tools, and it gave him a reputation.
Yeah.
He was known as this charming man. He worked for a lot of wealthy elderly women in places like Leaside and other upscale neighborhoods who just loved him.
Oh, he's the nice man who does our gardens.
He was the nice guy who made their gardens beautiful.
Charming. That word comes up a lot in serial killer profiles. Ted Bundy was charming. It's a tool.
It's camouflage. And frankly, the mall Santa gig at Agincourt Mall, that is the ultimate camouflage.
It really is.
I mean, who suspects Santa?
But here is the thing that frustrates me, and I think a lot of people. There were cracks in the mask way before the murder started. This wasn't a guy who had zero record. We have to talk about the 2001 assault because, looking back, it feels like a massive neon sign was flashing.
It's the critical what if of this entire case.
Yeah.
Halloween 2001. McArthur is 50 years old at this point.
Okay.
He follows a man named Mark Henderson, a model and actor, into his apartment. Henderson had apparently invited him in to show him his Halloween costume.
Okay, so it sounds friendly enough on the surface. A bit flirty, maybe.
Seemed that way. But McArthur was carrying an iron pipe.
Wait. He was just walking around with an iron pipe.
He had it with him. And once he was inside, he struck Henderson from behind, multiple times.
See, that's not a crime of passion in the heat of the moment. If you're carrying the weapon with you into the apartment, that's premeditated. That's a plan.
Absolutely. And Henderson actually fought back. He lost consciousness for a bit, but he woke up and called 911. It was a brutal, brutal attack.
How badly was he hurt?
He needed stitches in his head and fingers and weeks of physiotherapy to recover. It was a serious assault.
So McArthur turns himself in. What happens then?
He did. He turned himself in, and he claimed he had no memory of the attack.
Oh, come on.
He basically pleaded temporary insanity or confusion. He pleaded guilty to assault with a weapon and assault causing bodily harm.
Okay, assault with a weapon, an iron pipe, a planned attack from behind. That has to mean prison time, right?
You would think. You would absolutely think so. But this is where the legal system starts to show its cracks. He received a conditional sentence.
Break that down for us. What does a conditional sentence actually mean in Canada? I think a lot of people don't know the specifics.
It's effectively a jail sentence served in the community.
So house arrest.
Exactly. It's house arrest. He had a curfew. He had probation. He couldn't leave his home without permission, except for work or medical reasons. But the key point is he wasn't behind bars.
And why such leniency for such a violent, unprovoked attack?
The psychological reports at the time deemed him a low risk to reoffend.
Oh.
The theory was that he had a bad reaction to a mix of his anti-seizure medication and Popper's amyl nitrite, which he was using.
So they blamed the drugs.
They framed it as a one-off medical or psychological episode rather than a pattern of violence. They also put a condition on him that he was banned from the gay village and banned from possessing Poppers.
Low risk. That assessment aged horribly. I mean, just tragically.
It did. But here is the most damaging part, the systemic failure that really, you could argue, paved the way for the murders. In 2014, McArthur was granted a record suspension.
I want to pause on this because I think there's some confusion about what that actually is. Is that the same as a pardon?
Essentially, yes.
It's
the same thing. In Canada, we used to call them pardons. Now they were called record suspensions. The logic behind it is rehabilitation. The idea is that if you complete your sentence and you wait a certain number of years, usually 5 or 10, depending on the severity of the crime, and you keep the peace and be of good behavior, you can apply to the Parole Board of Canada to have your record set aside.
So it's not that he was found innocent. That's a key distinction. It's that the government decided he had been good enough for long enough that the crime shouldn't haunt him anymore.
Precisely. And the practical effect of a record suspension is that the conviction is removed from the CPIC database. That's the Canadian Police Information Center.
The main police database.
Right. It is sealed. So later, if a police officer pulls him over or runs a standard background check on Bruce McArthur, this violent assault with an iron pipe simply doesn't show up. It comes back clean.
That is terrifying. It literally created a massive blind spot for investigators later on. He's walking around with what looks like a clean sheet of paper, but the reality is he bludgeoned a man with a pipe.
Exactly. It made him invisible to the system right when he was becoming most dangerous. It allowed him to operate with a presumption of innocence that his history should have completely negated.
So the slate is wiped clean. The system says you're good. And by 2010, the disappearances begin.
And this brings us to the victims. And it's so crucial we understand that these weren't random attacks. McArthur was hunting. He was hunting a specific profile.
Yeah.
Over 7 years, 8 men disappeared. And there are striking commonalities between them.
Physically, they looked alike for the most part.
They did. Most were middle-aged. Most had facial hair beards or goatees. They fit the physical type of the bear subculture in the gay community.
And for listeners who might not know, could you explain the bear subculture? It's pretty distinct from the sort of mainstream stereotype of the twink or the gym fit gay man, right?
Right, yeah. The bear community celebrates a bigger, hairier, more traditionally masculine aesthetic. It's a very specific scene, often centered around this idea of brotherhood and acceptance of different body types.
So a community within a community.
Exactly. And McArthur identified as a bear, and he was attracted to bears. They frequented specific bars, like the Black Eagle in Toronto, which was a known spot for that crowd.
But the targeting, it wasn't just physical, was it? There was a demographic targeting happening here that is much, much darker.
That's the key insight. That is the thing that makes this case so chilling. 6 of the 8 victims were of South Asian or Middle Eastern descent.
6 out of 8.
Yes. And many were closeted. Some were immigrants or refugees. Some were struggling with substance abuse.
So he was targeting men who were marginalized even within the marginalized community.
Precisely. Criminologists have a term for this. They call it targeting the less dead or the missing.
Really missing. Whoa.
He picked men whose disappearances might be explained away by their families or the police. Oh, he probably just went back to his home country, or he's hiding from his family. Excuses that delay a real investigation.
Let's walk through the timeline, because the police response, or the lack of response, is a huge part of this story. The first era is what became known as Project Houston. This is from 2010 to 2012.
Right. 3 men vanished in this period.
Okay.
First, there was Skandaraj Navratnam, known as Skanda. He went missing in September 2010.
And Skanda's story is just heartbreaking. He was a refugee, right?
He was a Tamil refugee from Sri Lanka. He had built a life in Toronto. He actually worked for McArthur's landscaping company.
Oh, wow.
And they had a romantic history.
Oh.
But the thing that stuck with his friends, the thing they knew was wrong immediately. He had a dog.
And you don't just walk away from your dog.
Never. His friends knew right away. Skanda loved that dog. When the dog was left behind, that was the first major alarm bell for them.
But from a police perspective, I guess, adults are allowed to go missing. They're allowed to just leave.
That's the problem. Unless there's evidence of foul play, it's not a crime to disappear.
Then just a few months later, December 2010, Abdul Basir Faizi goes missing, known as Basir.
Basir Faizi fits that profile of vulnerability we just talked about perfectly. He was an Afghan immigrant, married with 2 daughters, living in the suburbs of Brampton.
So a family man.
A family man, but he was leading a double life. He hadn't come out to his family. He would come to the village in secret.
Which makes the investigation so much harder. The family doesn't know where to look, and they might not even tell the police everything because of the cultural stigma involved.
Exactly. It creates these information silos. And on the night he disappeared, police eventually found his car abandoned on Moore Avenue.
Moore Avenue. Okay, put a pin in that. That location is incredibly significant, isn't it?
It's vital. Moore Avenue is steps away from the Beltline Trail, but more importantly, it connects directly to Mallory Crescent.
Mallory Crescent. And that's where McArthur stored his landscaping equipment.
It was his base of operations. He had a client there, a woman, who let him use her garage and her backyard for his business. So Basir's car was found practically on McArthur's doorstep.
But at the time, police didn't make that connection.
No. They saw an abandoned car. They thought maybe Basir had just walked away from this double life, maybe returned to the Middle East, or just started over somewhere else.
And the third man in this group?
Majid Kaihan, known as Hamid. He went missing in October 2012. Another Afghan immigrant, also closeted from his Muslim family, and he also had a sexual relationship with McArthur.
So you have 3 men, all brown, all connected to the village, all missing within 2 years. The police did launch a task force, Project Houston.
They did. The community was raising the alarm, so they responded. It ran for 18 months. And here is the frustration that drives people crazy about this case. McArthur was on their radar.
He was interviewed.
He was interviewed in 2013.
Why? How did they connect him?
Because looking at the phone records and employment records of Skanda and Hamid, McArthur's name came up. He was Bruce the landscaper. He was a known associate.
So he's sitting in an interrogation room with the police. What happened?
He was calm. He was cooperative. He admitted he knew them. He admitted their relationships. But, and this is the difficulty of police work, admitting you dated someone isn't admitting you killed them.
And crucially, they had no bodies.
No bodies, no crime scene, no blood, just missing men. And McArthur, remember, he's the nice grandpa.
Right.
He's the landscaper. He didn't come off as a threat. So the task force concluded there was no evidence of a crime.
Right.
They shut it down.
They just gave up.
They hit a wall. Without physical evidence, they couldn't justify keeping the resources flowing. Project Houston was focused on finding the men, but without a lead pointing to foul play, it fizzled out.
And that closure, that silence from the police, it gave McArthur permission to continue.
It did.
We enter the gap years between 2013 and 2016. The task force is gone, but the killing continues.
And the victims in this period highlight that concept of the missing even more starkly. This is where the vulnerabilities become weaponized.
Who were they?
In 2015, Sarush Mahmoodi disappeared, a refugee from Iran. He was married. His family didn't know he was connected to the gay scene at all.
So when they reported him missing...
The police weren't looking for him in the village. They were looking for a missing family man from Scarborough. The docs weren't connected.
And then there is Krishna Kumar Kanagaratnam. This story, it really shows how immigration status can be a weapon for a predator.
It is the most heartbreaking example of vulnerability in this whole case, I think.
Yeah.
Krishna was a Tamil asylum seeker. He arrived on the MV Sun Sea, that famous ship of refugees that arrived in BC in 2010.
Okay.
But his asylum claim was denied. He was under deportation order.
So he was living underground. He was hiding.
He was effectively hiding from the government to avoid being sent back to Sri Lanka, where he feared for his life. He was off the grid. He couldn't get a legal job. He couldn't get a driver's license. He couldn't open a bank account.
So when McArthur killed him...
No one reported him missing.
No.
Because reporting him missing meant exposing him to immigration enforcement. His family thought he was just laying low, staying off the radar. He was a ghost. McArthur killed him, and literally no one in the system knew he was gone.
And Dean Lisowick?
Dean was homeless. He relied on the shelter system. He was a sex worker. He struggled with addiction. He wasn't reported missing either because his life was, by its nature, transient.
Right.
McArthur knew that if he took these men, the refugee in hiding, the homeless sex worker, the clock wouldn't start ticking immediately. There would be no frantic search party the next day.
It sounds like he was refining his selection process, moving from people like Skanda, who had a close circle of friends asking questions, to people like Krishna, who had nobody that could ask questions without risking something.
That is a very distinct and terrifying possibility. He was learning what he could get away with.
But then, in 2017, the clock started ticking, very loud and very fast. This is part 3, the turning point.
Project Prism. This new task force was formed to investigate the disappearance of 2 men, Salim Asen, who went missing in April 2017, and Andrew Kinsman, who vanished in June. And we have to be honest here. Andrew Kinsman's disappearance changed the entire dynamic of the investigation.
Why? What was different about Andrew?
Andrew Kinsman was white. He was a very well-known community volunteer. He was the superintendent of his building in Cabbagetown. He had a very stable routine, a lot of friends, a big social network.
So when he went missing?
It was instant chaos. It was immediate. He went missing in June 2017, just days after the Pride Parade. He left his cat without food. For his friends, that was it.
That's the signal.
That was the signal. They knew something was terribly wrong. Within 72 hours, there were search parties organized by friends. The community put immense pressure on the police. Posters were on every telephone pole from Bloor to Dundas.
This is uncomfortable to say, but did his race and social standing speed things up? Was that the difference?
That is a major point of contention and a source of a lot of anger in the community. Critics argue that the perfect victim dynamic flipped.
Right.
When a well-connected white man vanished, suddenly the resources appeared. Police argue that Kinsman simply left more clues, that his life was more documented.
And he did leave clues. The breakthrough evidence here feels almost cinematic, like something out of a movie.
It really does.
Yeah.
And it wasn't high-tech initially. It was a paper wall calendar.
Calendar in 2017.
Andrew Kinsman was old school. He wrote his appointments down, and on the entry for June 26th, the day he vanished, he had written the name Bruce.
Just Bruce? No last name, no number.
Just Bruce. But that gave them a thread to pull on. Then they found surveillance video from a camera near Kinsman's residence. It was grainy footage, but it showed Kinsman getting into a vehicle on the day he disappeared.
What kind of vehicle?
A red 2004 Dodge Caravan.
Okay, so they have a first name, Bruce, and a specific type of car, a red Dodge Caravan.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, they ran a search. How many 2004 Dodge Caravans are registered in the entire city of Toronto? About 6,000.
That's a haystack. A massive haystack.
It is. But when you cross-reference the name Bruce with the registered owners of those 6,000 vans, the list shrank to 5 people.
5. From 6,000 down to 5.
And one of them was Bruce McArthur.
And did he still have the van?
No. And this shows his consciousness of guilt, his awareness. Shortly after Kinsman disappeared, McArthur took that van to a scrapyard, Dom's Auto Parts in Curtis, Ontario, which is east of the city. He sold it for scrap.
He was trying to crush the evidence, literally.
He was. He's trying to make it disappear. But the police got there just in time. The owner hadn't crushed it yet. The police seized it. And even though McArthur tried to clean it,
Forensic science is hard to beat.
it's very hard to beat. They found trace amounts of blood in the back of the van, and when they ran the DNA, it matched Andrew Kinsman.
That was the smoking gun.
That was it.
This distinguishes Project Prism from Project Houston. Houston had suspicion, they had a name. Prism had blood.
Exactly. That DNA match transformed the investigation from a missing persons case into a homicide investigation.
Yep.
It gave them their prime suspect.
So now we are in late 2017. They know it's him. Why didn't they arrest him immediately?
Well, they needed to build the case. A DNA match in the van he used to own is strong, but they wanted more. And they wanted to see if he would lead them to the bodies.
So they put him under surveillance.
Round-the-clock surveillance.
Hmm.
And they did something very risky. They covertly entered his apartment when he wasn't there and cloned his hard drive.
That sounds like a spy movie. That must have been incredibly tense.
It's high-stakes police work for sure. And what they found on that hard drive confirmed their worst nightmares. They found deleted photos.
Photos of the victims.
Post-mortem photos of the victims.
We'll get to the details of those photos later, but they knew. They knew they were dealing with a monster. And then comes January 18th, 2018, the day of the arrest.
It was a terrifying morning. The police surveillance team was watching his apartment building in Thorncliffe Park. They saw a young man enter the building with McArthur.
And they had a safety trigger. Right. A rule that if he was alone with someone, they had to go in.
They couldn't risk it.
Yeah.
They believed this young man was in imminent danger of becoming the 9th victim. They breached the door. They kicked it in.
And what did they find?
They found the young man, who is referred to in court documents as John, to protect his identity restrained to McArthur's bed. There was a bag over his head. McArthur was in the process of attempting to tape his mouth shut.
My God. They walked in on an active murder attempt.
They were minutes, maybe seconds away from it being too late. They saved that man's life. McArthur was arrested on the spot.
So they have the man. They have the killer. But they still need to find the victims to get justice for their families. And this leads to the image that I think traumatized the entire city, the planters.
Mallory Crescent. That home in Leaside where McArthur stored his tools, he had done extensive landscaping for the owners there over many years. And in the backyard, there were these massive wooden planters he had built.
And this was January in Toronto. The ground was frozen solid.
Completely frozen. The police brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs went crazy near the planters. They kept signaling. But because everything was frozen solid, they had to bring in these massive industrial heaters. They had to build a tent over the backyard and literally thaw the ground for days.
It must have been such a slow, gruesome process.
And inside those planters, mixed with the potting soil, they found the dismembered skeletal remains of 7 men.
7 men, hidden in flower pots. He was watering flowers on top of them.
It's the ultimate grotesque camouflage. Beauty on top, horror underneath. It speaks to a level of compartmentalization that is almost impossible to understand. The homeowners had no idea. They told police they had hosted barbecues next to these planters.
That is just, it's macabre. It's beyond words. And the 8th victim.
Majid Kayhan. He wasn't in a planter. His remains were eventually found later in a compost pile in the ravine behind the property.
So we have the man, we have the victims, but we have to go back to the anger. Because once the initial shock of the arrest wore off, the community was furious.
Rightfully so.
This brings us to part 5, controversies and failures. There was a massive feeling of betrayal.
A huge feeling of betrayal.
I remember the press conference in December 2017. This was just weeks before the arrest. The police chief at the time, Mark Saunders, stands up and says there is no evidence of a serial killer in the village.
That soundbite aged terribly. Now, to be fair to the police, there is a tension here.
Okay.
Legally, they didn't have proof yet that they could present in court. They couldn't say serial killer in a way that would hold up. They had a strong suspicion.
But to a community that had been shouting, men are disappearing for 7 years.
It felt like gaslighting. It felt like they were being dismissed all over again.
And then Saunders made it even worse with that interview in the Globe and Mail.
Oh, the victim-blaming narrative. That was a disaster. He was quoted saying that civilians failed to help the investigation. He implied that if people had come forward sooner with more information, they could have solved it faster.
That completely ignores the reality of the relationship between the police and the LGBTQ community.
Exactly. You can't ask a marginalized community, many of whom have historical trauma with the police, or who fear deportation, or who are closeted.
Yeah.
You can't just ask them to come forward without building trust first. It was a massive, massive PR disaster.
But beyond the PR, there were concrete, specific failures. We have to talk about the 2016 choking incident.
This is the one that keeps investigators up at night.
Yeah.
This is the big one. In 2016, so this is in the gap between Project Houston and Project Prism, a man reported that McArthur tried to strangle him in his van.
The escape.
He managed to escape, and he went straight to the police. The investigating officer, a Sergeant Paul Gauthier, interviewed McArthur. And McArthur claimed it was consensual rough sex that went wrong, a BDSM scene that got out of hand.
And the officer just bought it.
He didn't follow proper procedure. The protocol for a domestic violence allegation, and this counted as a domestic relationship under the law, requires photographing any injuries and filing a specific detailed report.
And he didn't do that.
He didn't do it. He took McArthur at his word and released him without charge.
And this was 2016. That means
Salim Asen and Andrew Kinsman were killed after McArthur was released from that interrogation.
that is devastating. 2 lives could have been saved if procedure had been followed that day.
Now, Salim Gauthier was charged internally with insubordination and neglect of duty. He was eventually found not guilty by the police tribunal, largely because he argued he was overworked, the system was broken, and he was being made a scapegoat. But the failure of the process is undeniable.
Let's move to the legal conclusion and the aftermath. McArthur was arrested in 2018. Did this go to a long, drawn-out trial?
No, surprisingly. In January 2019, McArthur pleaded guilty to 8 counts of first-degree murder.
Why plead guilty? Why not take his chances with the jury?
It's hard to say for sure, but the evidence was overwhelming. The DNA, the photos on his hard drive. A trial would have been a media circus. Pleading guilty was likely a way to avoid the gruesome details coming out over months, and perhaps to maintain some final shred of control over the narrative.
But even with the plea, the details that came out in the sentencing hearing were the stuff of nightmares.
They were.
The prosecutor laid out the post-sentence rituals.
Yes. McArthur kept trophies, he had jewelry belonging to the victims, notebooks. But the most disturbing part, by far, was the photos.
The photos found on his hard drive.
He staged the bodies. After death, he would pose them. Sometimes he would dress them in a fur coat he owned. Sometimes he put an unlit cigar in their mouths. He would shave their heads or beards after they were dead.
It sounds ritualistic. It's not just killing, it's something else.
It was about absolute power. It was about possession, even after death. He also kept folders on his computer for each victim, and he kept locks of hair from the victims in Ziploc bags in his apartment.
So the judge, Justice John McMahon, what was the sentence?
He sentenced him to life imprisonment.
With any eligibility for parole.
Eligibility in 25 years. But McArthur will be 91 years old at that point, so practically speaking, he will die in prison. The judge called the crimes pure evil.
And after the sentencing, there was a major review, right? The Epstein report.
The independent civilian review into missing person investigations, led by a retired judge, Justice Gloria Epstein. It was a massive undertaking, looking at how the police handle all missing persons cases, but especially in relation to this one.
And what did it conclude?
It was damning. It was absolutely damning. It found systemic discrimination in the Toronto Police Service.
Systemic, so not just a few bad officers.
Exactly. It didn't say individual officers were necessarily racist or homophobic, but that the system itself, the databases, the communication between divisions, the culture, was designed in a way that failed these specific marginalized communities.
It treated a missing white superintendent differently than a missing Tamil refugee.
That's what it came down to. And it did lead to changes. There was an apology from the interim police chief and the creation of a dedicated missing persons unit to ensure cases like these don't fall through the cracks again.
So as we wrap this up, what are we left with? What's the final takeaway?
We're left with the legacy of the largest forensic investigation in Toronto's history. But more than that, we are left with a shattered sense of safety in the village. For decades, that neighborhood was a sanctuary, a place you could go to be yourself. McArthur turned it into a hunting ground.
And we have to remember the victims, not just as names on a list, but as men with lives and families. Skanda, Basir, Hamid, Sarush, Karushna, Dean, Salim, and Andrew.
And we must remember the missing. The concept itself is chilling. Men like Karushna Kanagratnam, who didn't exist on paper in Canada. If his remains hadn't been found in that planter, we might never have known he was dead. It makes you ask, how many others are there in the margins of society who just disappear without a trace?
That is a haunting thought. And here's one final thing for you to chew on. McArthur was caught because of a paper calendar and a surveillance camera. Very old school clues, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he used dating apps to hunt. He used the digital anonymity of the modern world to find his victims.
It's a paradox. Technology facilitated his crimes, but ultimately, digital forensics recovering those deleted photos from his hard drive helped seal his fate.
It makes you wonder, if he hadn't kept those digital trophies, if he wasn't so narcissistic as to keep those photos, or if he had just managed to crush that van a week earlier, would he still be out there?
Given his age and his ability to blend in, it is a terrifying possibility. He could have just kept going.
On that chilling note, that is it for this deep dive. Take care of each other out there.
Stay safe.
We'll see you next time.